Hello, ladies,
Hey, everyone. Oh, I
and
thought I
welcome
was.
to Inside Movies Galore. I'm your host, David Streggy, and here in the room, I have the real host for tonight's episode. Dustin, take it away.
Hey, well, as Dave was kind of saying, welcome to tonight's Inside Movies Galore panel. I'm Dustin, and I'm your host here with Dave.
Hey,
like we had him do it anyway. We're here with Dave, Dane,
Hello.
Jake,
Hi.
and Brandon. And
Hello.
so, shout out in solidarity to Katie, who could not make it tonight, but is here in spirit. So, we're talking about Ridley Scott's Legend, an epic fairy tale from 1985 that starred Mia Sara, a very young Tom Cruise, and Tim Curry as the Lord of Darkness in maybe one of his coolest roles. Definitely one of his coolest roles. And, I can't think of a Tim Curry role that I actually like more than Darkness. So,
Well, but he has a lot of cool roles, so that's the only point I was trying to make.
No kidding.
Oh,
Yeah.
you pointed out how young Tom Cruise was when Mia Sara was like 5 years older.
She was what?
He was like 5 years older than him.
She was like 15. I found that out today, which made me feel kind of bad about myself. But anyway, so just our traditional spoiler warning. So we'll be talking a lot about the plot and our thoughts on the characters and events. So if you don't want the movie spoiled for you, maybe stop listening now and go watch this movie, because when I was doing some prep for this, I was asking around, and apparently a shamefully low number of people have actually seen this movie, which just blows my mind. So if you haven't seen it, go see it. But if you have, you're in for a fun time. So let's take it away. So what'd you guys say?
Nothing.
Oh. Well, I keep thinking people are trying to jump in. So anyway, the plot is a little thin, but kind of difficult to summarize quickly. So the main gist of it is that the Lord of Darkness wants to bring about eternal night by killing the last two unicorns and harnessing the magic power of their horns. And meanwhile, Princess Lily is visiting her friend Jack in the forest, and they kind of get sucked into Darkness's plan. And so then Jack must join with a bunch of magical woodland creatures to go on a quest to save Lily and the unicorns. And I'm making it sound kind of weird, but that's because it is. Yet at the same time, it's also really great. It takes a lot of the kind of traditional fairy tale elements and creatures and kind of blends them in together into something that feels very familiar, story and structure wise, but it's still its own unique thing. So I mean, I really love this movie. This is a great movie. So that's kind of my opinion on it. I first saw it criminally late in life, in about 2009, 10, something like that. And I've seen it maybe about a half dozen times since. So, I mean, it always holds up, and it's always a fun watch. And so that's kind of my first experience with it. So, how about you? I better pick somebody. Dane.
When did I first see this? This would have been a couple years ago. I want to say late 2014, early 2015, something like that.
Oh, wow.
And not a first timer there, but and just for reference, I watched the director's cut. But honestly, this might be a controversial opinion, but I think this might be my favorite Ridley Scott film. And he's made quite a lot of good ones. But this might be my personal favorite just because it is high fantasy and dark fantasy done in a very archetypical fashion, but with all kinds of amazing practical visual effects, and with obviously a beautiful leading lady, a really well designed villain, and Tom Cruise managing to fit pretty well into a fantasy world, which he's not really used to doing, because typically his strengths are portraying people that more or less exist in the real contemporary world, whether that's late 20th or early 21st century, but actually fitting in there very well. It honestly was about the closest that I have seen to what I would have hoped a Legend of Zelda movie would be like, except this came out 1 year before the game debuted in America. But actually, no, I think it came out in '87 in America, but '86 in Japan. Anyway,
Oh shit, you're right.
yeah. Anyway,
This could be one hell of a Zelda movie.
yeah, but anyway, I do think archetypically it's not that far off from Zelda or any other kind of prototypical high fantasy story. But I think the fact that it is so simple, but it's so well executed, it's practically like a moving painting. And I mean, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but it's probably my favorite of his films for that reason.
Yeah, I think I can really relate with that. Like, it is definitely one of his best films. I mean, I'm still kind of an Alien loyalist, but yeah, I can very well respect that opinion. And yeah, at the same time, like, did you kind of get that feeling too, where despite it being such a sort of standardized fairy tale, like it did feel like it was like for sure its own thing too?
Yeah, it's quite something because it is so archetypical. It does work on its own, even if you were never exposed to any kind of fantasy films outside of it. And I particularly like that the Lord of Darkness, he often gets held up as one of the best depictions of the devil in film. And
Easily.
you can definitely see that. I mean, he's not referred to specifically as the devil, but that is his role clearly in the film. And he's definitely one of the most visually inspired, charismatic portrayals.
So I think we'll have to save that for our character section.
Oh, yeah.
As we kind of forget about everybody else. Sorry, guys. How about you, Dave?
Well, I actually did not see this in my childhood. It wasn't until I got together with my fiance that she reminded me about this film, and we watched it together like maybe 7, 8 years ago, and I haven't seen it since. And it's kind of because it's kind of an oddball, and even though I like fantasy, I like I enjoyed it at the time, but because I hadn't grown up with it as much as I'd grown up with other films with Billy Barty, who played one of the dwarves in here, which I recognized later in my rewatching of it. And so this was a second time watching this film, and I've actually owned the UK version for quite some years. It's just sat in my collection. I hadn't watched it over and over, so I'm glad I had a chance to sit down and watch it. And I think that it's a very young role for Tom Cruise to be in. I mean, he's very young. This is right about the time where evidently he became a sex symbol for young ladies. You know, I remember
this was 1 year before Top Gun, by the way, which that was the film that really not only propelled him into superstardom, but specifically, like you said, this sex symbol in the '80s.
Well, yeah,
was he in this movie?
He would have been early 20s, I think, and Mia Sara was very young too.
I think Tom Cruise was about 20 when the film was made, because this film was in production for like 3 years. I think he was about 20.
Yeah, and the awkwardness of his acting definitely showed in here. So I think because it made him kind of vulnerable looking, it kind of it kind of showed through.
You believed he could die if he like screwed up.
Correct.
Yeah. Well,
Because
and that's the other thing. Yeah, that is the other thing with him is like because he's a younger, more inexperienced actor, and the character is, to kind of put it in parallel video game terms, he's a lot like young Link. someone who's just getting started on his journey, more or less. And so, therefore, like you said, he is more vulnerable, more of a sympathetic protagonist because he's not what Tom Cruise would become later, which is like the Ethan Hunt kind of action hero. And so it's a position that he was not really in very often and hasn't really been in very often since, but it's a good position for him to be in as an actor.
Yeah. Before we move on to Jake and Brandon too, something that we probably should have led with. For Legend, there are kind of two different versions. There's a theatrical cut and a director's cut, and they both are pretty wildly different. So the theatrical cut is about a half hour shorter and has a different soundtrack by Tangerine Dream. And the director's cut is kind of more or less like sort of like the European version. It has a score by Jerry Goldsmith and runs almost 2 hours. So plus a few things are different. Like, for example, the ending is different, which remind me to cover that when we get there. So I watched the director's cut. How about everybody sign off with which cut they saw?
Well, I already said director's cut.
Okay, so you said directors. You were directors too, Dave, right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, what about you, Jake? Also, give us your impressions and stuff.
All right. Well, this was a film that I think I did see it as a child. Maybe not a young child.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I saw it in the 80s. I had only the vaguest recollection of it. I think I'd probably seen it fully once and maybe partially once, but I remember the scene early on after the world has frozen and Mia Sara is in the house where the goblins come in. I remembered that from my childhood, but I remembered almost nothing else of the film. So that so this was a revisit after a long time, and I actually watched both cuts. I watched the regular and the theatrical um, to prep for this, which was
Nice.
a thing. Uh, yeah, it was interesting. And I'm trying to recall what else I had to say on that. I did have to comment briefly. I was kind of amused, Dan, when you said something about it was kind of weird seeing Tom Cruise in a fantasy world, and I'm like, well, that's what most people say he's in all the time. But
So in real life, well, that's different. But I mean, you know what I mean, though. Like in his roles, the kinds of roles that he excels in are the ones where he plays contemporary people, as opposed to.
It's definitely an Ethan Hunt role. Definitely.
Yeah, exactly.
And the other thing I wanted to say is also on your comment on Ridley Scott. I think I have a slightly controversial thing with Ridley Scott, and that is most of his films I've seen, and I've seen a pretty fair number of them, not all of them by any means, but a lot of them. They're usually pretty solid, they're pretty entertaining, and almost without exception, I cannot think of one that is an exception. I think they're all overrated. I have never seen one that I thought was underrated, and that honestly, this one falls in that category. This one is one of the ones where it's closest to being about the right level for me, because the film does have sort of a cult following. Um, but like some of his stuff, like Blade Runner and Gladiator and Alien, and a lot of them, I'm a little controversial myself because I'm always like Ridley Scott. Yeah, he's always overrated, but the good films. But
I cast thee out.
but yeah, that's my initial take.
I actually don't know how to do that, so you're safe. Anyway, hey Brandon, you're live.
All right. Any case, I had watched the really. There is theoretically a theatrical version of the European cut that had an abridged version of the original soundtrack. I did a lot of research into the soundtrack for this film for this one.
Good.
But the original exposure I had was when I was very young. We had first gotten access to HBO and color TV. Because we only had access to like black and white TV from my early, and this was one of those first movies I actually did get to see in color. So it was kind of cool to see that. At least in my memory anyway.
Wow.
And it is quite a thing to see when you're really young. My first exposure being the theatrical cut, because really the director's cut really wasn't available in that time in the 80s. But later on, my parents picked up the DVD, which is a pretty cool DVD, the original release, which had both versions on it. So I got to see that and see both cuts. So I think it was in the late 90s I saw the other cut. So I've seen it a number of times since then. It's still one of my favorite movies. I think it's probably one of his most underrated films when it comes to Ridley Scott, because people don't really talk about this one, which is sad because it's also one of the better roles I've seen for. Gosh, I had his name and I lost it again, but
Tom Cruise.
But for Tom Cruise as well. So to me, good first impression. I still really love this film today. I can see where people might not like the film, but at the same time, haters gonna hate.
Yeah, I kind of wish I had gotten to see this when I was younger. So I feel like I would have enjoyed it more. But I think it was a good time when I got to see it, though.
I do too.
It was more confusing as a child.
I wish that I had seen this as a child, as like I'd seen something of an adaptation of like Chronicles of Narnia. I mean, I remember the animated version, but I kind of wish that I had seen the BBC production when I was younger, kind of. But back to Legend. I mean, you have a simple storyline that kind of, I mean, to me, I'm looking at it from a Christian perspective, and I kind of see an Adam and Eve quality about Tom Cruise's character and the young lady that is his infatuation.
And Lily?
Correct.
See, I actually know their names this time. We put effort in.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. That's a good possible bent they might have had there.
I guess I can do that too.
With my own Christian background, this film was too dark for me when I first saw it. Now I like this kind of stuff, but when I was a kid, it was too dark. So that might be one reason why it took so long for me to revisit it.
Well, a few times, like in Darkness's dialogue, he makes references to like sort of like a higher power than himself. Like, I don't know if it's getting too far ahead of ourselves, but during the climax when they defeat him, he shouts, "Father, protect me!" It's like, what is that? Who is he talking to? Because that's a running theme too. He's like speaking with some intangible force the entire time.
Yeah, it is very archetypical. And I like the Adam and Eve comparison there. I always saw it as I don't know why. It did remind me a lot of the Legend of Zelda archetype, just because our hero happens to be a forest dweller and live amongst nature and that kind of stuff, and he
kind of like an orphan of the forest.
And that is what Link is. He is Hylian, who is raised as a Kokiri for his whole life, and it has the affections of a princess and everything. But I could definitely see the Adam and Eve ideas.
There's a quick thing I wanted to touch on in the supplements for this. Jack is kind of supposed to be like the green man, like the man of like the man of the forest kind of thing. Like that's why he's wearing green. And at one point they were like, oh, what if we tint his skin green? It's like, oh, what if his skin can change color? You mean like a chameleon? Yeah. How about that? So we'd make him a lizard? Yeah. It's like, why would the princess want to be with like a lizard man? It's like, yeah, you're right. Fuck me. What was I thinking? Never mind.
Well, in the sense, he's also
that was Ridley Scott's thought process. Like those were his words from the interview I saw.
in a sense, he's kind of like a Tarzan-like character, in a sense, like almost like a Mowgli character, like a combination of Mowgli and Tarzan put together. You know, it's well, he's.
I can see the point. Yeah.
Well, you were saying man of the forest. Well, all of the animals and creatures seem to follow Jack. You know, in a sense, that's exactly what Tarzan, the character.
It's kind of like the European folklore kind of Green Man. Like remember Meteor Man, the Green Man in like that kind of Green Man.
The whole thing is very heavily rooted in European folklore, not only in terms of that. Jack also has a little bit of Peter Pan in him in that respect because he also wears everything. But like also you see at one point you see Baba Yaga in there, who is an old witch woman of the swamp. You know,
Meg Mucklebones.
Yeah, which I mean that's where that comes from, is the tale of Baba Yaga.
I definitely also felt the Peter Pan thing because Una reminded me so much of Tinkerbell in a lot of ways. But also the what was I going to say? I had a thought and I lost it. Never mind.
Like the gnomes, and I wanted to say that one guy was a satyr, but I think he was an elf. Like I don't know if I think they mentioned it very quickly, and I missed exactly what he is. But
Jack's connection to the forest. I was going to mention you do have that one scene that I found somewhat amusing that I think was the same in both cuts, where you had Jack was teaching the princess all the different animals. She's like, teach me rabbit, and you know, that sort of thing. And I'm sitting here going, he's training her to be a Disney princess.
well,
there does
speak. Sorry, go ahead, Dave.
There just does so happen to have to be a Disney princess in every single Disney film.
Well, keep in mind that this also came out in the same year as The Black Cauldron, which was a dark fantasy Disney film, which also did not do well at the box office, but also has developed its own cult following and had a particularly scary villain.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I've heard of The Black Cauldron, but I'm not as familiar with it. Like, it's one of those many things that have just kind of fallen through the cracks.
I like it. I like it. It's definitely not the movie for everyone. It's very flawed, but I like the fact that Disney was trying something new. And so Legend had Jerry Goldsmith on the score, and The Black Cauldron had Elmore Bernstein, which is pretty cool. They were contemporaries, obviously, but very well done in their own right.
So,
touched on our discussion on Dark Crystal. I think we got into. It seemed like the 80s were the time for dark fantasy films that were supposed to be family films. It was weird.
And swords and sorcery films, and post-apocalyptic films towards the end of the 80s. Those were the two big genres. I mean, Conan, I believe, was early 80s, but just a lot of those types of films.
Yeah, so we keep jumping around a little bit. Largely, I think, my fault. So how do we want to tackle the plot? Do we want to do like a play-by-play, or do we just want to talk about kind of like the highlights? Because I think to start off with, I mean, it opens with Darkness, you know, laying out like his plan. Like he sends a goblin to go. So it's kind of. The story needs a lot of background before it really gets going, doesn't it?
Like you gotta read a lot of wall of text before you can even get anywhere.
Well, the thing is, you start off like at the you start off hearing the Lord of Darkness. That's pretty much what he is, and he's like the evil force in this world that seems to be like a Middle Earth kind of a world. You know,
It feels, if anybody's familiar with magic, it feels a little bit like Lorwyn, which is it's like a storybook, like it's like a storybook style like fantasy world where there aren't humans, but like everything from like European folklore, you know, like goblins, spriggans, you know, uh boggles, like all of that stuff is like everywhere.
and yet Jack was clearly a human
Yeah,
because
it's like
human feelings, and that's why the
it's like Lorwyn with humans, yeah.
yeah, and that one fairy was in love with him. That's why she kept, you know, helping him out along the way.
Well, anyway, so after we're introduced to Darkness, like Darkness sends one of his henchmen to go, you know, go find the unicorn and kill it, you know, and bring me the horn, because the horn has like magic powers that he's going to use to, like, he can't go out into sunlight. So his plan is to plunge the world into darkness, like by using the magic of the unicorns. And
I have to say, Blix, the main
cool.
henchman, was in fact the closest to one of the Harry Potter goblins that I could see. The you know, the goblins that ran the bank in Harry Potter.
Everybody's gonna be mad at me. I saw the first Harry Potter movie, and that's it. All the names I know are from people talking about it. I'm not being attacked. It's kind of a relief. How much do I suck? Let us know in the comments below.
Wow.
Well, anyway, after we get that scene, like Darkness says that, you know, the only way to lure the unicorns out is with like someone innocent. Like that's what like unicorns are like attracted to like purity. And so I think that's kind of where, like, at some point, like Blix sees Princess Lily with Jack in the forest, and Blix kind of starts tailing them. And like, because Jack's like friends with all the animals, like he wants to really impress Lily, or at least that's the impression I get. And so like he takes her to see the unicorns, but she kind of breaks some of the rules. Like she's just meant to like stay in the bushes and like watch them, but she gets close to them and, you know, tries to like touch and interact with them.
Just kind of impetuous in a sense. It's like, you know, she's adventurous, and yet she likes to break the rules just a little bit.
Yeah, that's
sequence.
That becomes kind of a plot point later on, because like Lily is like her character is like a very like innocent kind of like stereotypical like storybook, you know, like the pure of heart thing from Gravity Falls. You know, remember that joke that they did? Like her character is like very much that, but you can tell she has kind of like a bit of a mean streak in her. Like we see her like she visits her friends like in the cottage, and she like pulls down their clotheslines. Like she likes like little like bits of mischief like that. You know, like she doesn't, you know, follow the rules like she's supposed to in a lot of situations. She's like, you know, I'm not supposed to be out here in the forest, but yeah.
I'd say more mischievous than mean.
That's a better one.
Here, you can turn off those lights too.
What's going on?
I mean, I actually think that what was interesting is the director's cut actually did make her look more spoiled, and I mean, the scene in the director's cut, which was cut out of the theatrical, where she's like, "I don't see what the problem is," when she was going over to touch the unicorn, even when he was like, you know, don't.
That's kind of it's almost like kind of a that's why I kind of felt like it was kind of like a Adam and Eve thing, because in Christianity,
The temptation thing, yeah.
with the tree of knowledge and the fruit that she was supposed to have given Adam, and it was forbidden. Well, so were these unicorns. They were forbidden in the forest or in the world to be touched or to be talked to or even be seen in the presence of these animals. It was forbidden. So her going out and doing that is like her taking and learning all the knowledge, that Adam and Eve learned to get them cast out of Eden.
Yeah, and when she goes up to one and like interacts with it, like that distracts it long enough for Blix and like some of his other like goblin henchman creatures, like they're watching for a moment like this, like from the bushes, and like they knock the unicorn out with like a blow dart and like kill it and take its horn, and that brings on like all kinds of like magical disasters, like the forest like instantly, like the sky goes dark, like a few feet of snow fall, like everything freezes.
Which kind of brings me back to kind of like the Chronicles of Narnia, where after the children go through the wardrobe, they go into kind of an ice layer of Narnia.
Yeah, and Jack is okay during this moment because like you can tell pretty quickly that him and Lily like have a pretty special relationship. She like takes off one of her rings and it's like, I'll marry whoever finds this ring, and she like throws it like in a sort of a deep pool of water where he really shouldn't have any trouble finding it. Like it's almost like a flirty kind of thing. And so while he's down there, that's when like the snowstorm hits and like he almost gets trapped down there, like it freezes over. And so that's why they aren't together so something has to kind of happen to split them up for the story to like take off the way it does. And so that's what kind of keeps them separated. And like after the snowfall, she runs back to her friend's cabin and sees everybody like frozen in place. Like the goblins break in and start just like busting stuff. Yeah, that was kind of a fun scene. Like, what'd you guys think of that?
Well, it's like I said, that was the one I remembered. And yeah, you're right. She's hiding in the attic, and Blix is like drunk with power with this horn. He's just blowing stuff up. And yeah. One of them makes
That's
that
something
very.
I always remember. The whole thing with him later on doing the same thing, just constantly doing that fire chant of his.
It's like, look, I can blow stuff up. Like that was a quick digression from like the main plot. That was one of the scenes I really enjoyed, where like the henchmen are just like screwing around with the magic wand that the horn has become.
Right after where it's when darkness comes, the one's like, "Can't you take a joke?"
Yeah, actually, I have kind of a story with that. So I was sharing this to one of my friends who's like much more into fantasy than I am, and he was really into that scene. Like darkness, like the goblins are just like they're just like screwing around with the wand, and all of a sudden like darkness appears behind them, and one of them's like pointing and like, "Oh, look out!" And he's like, "Huh? What? Big D!" And to this day, that friend still calls me Big D. But like Blix just like drops the wand. It's like, nope, I'm not messing with it. See? And one of the other goblins like picks up and it's like, get back, darkness. I rule the land, or whatever, like ridiculous thing that he says. And like they immediately just like take the wand away from him, and like a zombie like sits up off the ground and like picks him up. And he's like, I was kidding. Have you no sense of humor? And like the zombie like throws him into a pit. And like that whole thing was like hilarious. It's like, do you think this is a mere plaything? And they kind of look at him like, no.
Actually, the humor reminded me a little bit of Terry Gilliam's style with Time Bandits. That to me had a lot of similarities in how they ran that.
Yeah, I could see some of that.
I don't think I've seen that.
That was an earlier Terry Gilliam film with a bunch of midgets.
Oh. Well, anyway, while Jack is kind of trapped under the ice, and Lily is like overhearing like what's going on, like Lily resolves to like try to do something to like protect the other unicorn. Like she stumbles back to like where the other unicorn is, and at this point, like a lot of the other like magical forest creatures have come out. Like I don't remember any of these guys' names, which hey, at least we remembered the cast this time.
Wasn't it Brown Tom that was there at that point?
Brown Tom, Una,
It's like what's his what was the other one?
It's almost like a fellowship style like band of like these like creatures that come out and they're like, oh, so you're the one who lured out the unicorn. I didn't mean to. It's like, you're the cause of all our sorrow. And she's like, no. It's like, aw. But anyway, they
you had Gumpy, the little boy, and Screwball and Brown Tom were the other ones.
Yeah, it can be kind of hard to keep a lot of these characters, unless you hear some characters' names like over and over and over again. It can be kind of hard to keep them straight because a lot of them are somewhat similar looking, or at least Brown Tom and the other guy are pretty similar looking.
As far as those group, as far as their introduction scene, I may have missed something in the theatrical cut. I'm not going to lie. I am very, very tired today. I might have missed something, but I felt like the director's cut did a better job of explaining their change in action toward Jack. Like they kind of abruptly go from threatening him to being his buds. And I feel like maybe I missed something in the theatrical cut, or the director's cut did a better job.
Well, they kind of just step out of the bushes. It's like, what the hell happened to our forest? It's like, you know something, don't you, Jack? It's like, well, you're gonna go fix it. You know, like we need a champion to go on a quest to rescue to keep the other unicorn safe and get the horn back. It's like, all right, you're it. Come on, I know where you can I know where you can find weapons and armor. And they just kind of conscript him.
Right.
And then like the goblins show up again while everybody is away, and they only leave like one guard with Lily and the unicorn, and he does like an okay job, but eventually like they shoot him in the face with an arrow and like capture Lily and the unicorn. Like he turns out to be okay. Like we even get a great joke out of that too. It's like, oh my God, Brown Tom! No, they got him! And then they lift up his hat. Like the arrow hits something that was under his hat. It's like a flask or something, and it's like, they got me. It's like, you're fine. Oh, okay. They swarmed me by the hundreds. Oh, fierce creatures they were. It's like, okay, sure. There were like literally two guys shooting arrows at them.
It got me in me brain pan, and the other guy's like, well, at least the arrow hit something that wouldn't damage or something like that. That was reminded, I know Brandon will get this joke, but I was reminded of Damaramu's brain very compact.
Well, it didn't hit anything of worth, that was for sure. Maybe not to him, anyway.
Nothing of value was lost. So, and then, so who wants to touch on the next scene? I've gone for a while. So I think after that, like Una takes Jack to like this cave, like full of different treasures, and he picks out like armor and a sword.
And she leads them to an exact armor. It's not just any armor; it's like the armor. Apparently, the fairies have hidden away this treasure in a cave somewhere, or maybe it's just some lost treasure. We don't know exactly what treasure it is. It's just a treasure. But they she leads him to have this armor that he does not know how to wear or use, but in a sense, I'm glad that she did, because he picks up the shield, which later is used with the witch in the swamp. So
That's well, anyway, so after that they come back and find out what happened, and then they immediately set off for Darkness's lair to try to rescue Lily and the other unicorn, instead of just get the horn back. Or and then on the way they have to go through the swamp. And hey, Dane, so how about you talk about that scene?
Which one? Oh yeah, through the swamp. Yeah, that was with the. What, remind me her name?
Meg Mucklebones.
Yeah, she was probably my favorite. Well, besides the Lord of Darkness, she was probably my favorite monster, just because she was really scary looking, and again, all practical and everything. And between the overall world building and everything, I was like, they really could have made not only a Legend of Zelda movie, but they could have easily made like a Lord of the Rings back then, just in terms of effects. Would it have been as, spectacular as the Peter Jackson ones because they didn't have CGI? Perhaps not, but I mean, I think that between that and Willow, I think they had the capacity with which to make something really amazing happen.
There was a lot of talk in the documentary I watched that the original script was just this utterly insane thing, like involving armies of fairies, and it was very elaborate. Like I remember the effects guy was talking about, it's like, I read it and it got to the point where I was just enjoying reading it and I was forgetting about it like as a movie. And then I was like, after I finished it, I was like, wow, that was amazing. And then I went back because it's like, oh, right, I got to make all this stuff. And I started making annotations. And pretty quickly, it was like, I would need $400 million to do all this stuff. And that's in mid 80s money. So, oof. I kind of wonder what that original script looked like. But,
well, apparently he had Lily turning into a cat girl or something, and that's like the one part I'm like, that's a little different.
Now you're sounding like it's an anime or something with her as a cat girl.
Ew. No, eventually they find their way into. They're able to sneak it. Oh, we didn't touch on what happened with Meg Mucklebones. So, you want to say what happened in the scene, Dane?
Sorry, I had to unmute my mic. Yeah, that I remember that she confronted Jack to try and get across the swamp there, and I remember that I love the way that she was taunting him, and that he was like genuinely terrified of her.
And like she's like, I'm gonna eat you. And like he has to like distract her. Like she sees her reflection like in his shield, and he tries like flattering her, and it kind of works-ish. She's like, I'm still gonna eat you, but thank you. And she's like looking at herself in the shield while Jack like can draw his sword, and he actually takes out Meg Mucklebones.
Yeah,
actually-
that's one of the things I like the most about that scene, is that, well, not only is she really scary, but the way that he defeats her is in a classical, I guess you could say European, but I was thinking more in terms of like the way that a hero of Greek mythology might defeat a monster by using his wits and trickery rather than just brute strength.
And he had did you guys catch like the little line afterward? Like, like Meg's like body like slumps over and he's like, I did it. It's like, I lived. How?
Actually, that's one where the theatrical cut is kind of funny in comparison, because it goes through a pretty elaborate nature in the director's cut. And the theatrical cut is like, hey, look at this. Whack. It is off the body. So it's almost climactic in the way that they did that. It just came across as hilarious. But that's just how I saw that originally.
Yeah, it was a really cool scene. And I remember the guy who like played Meg under like the costume. I remember he was some other suit actor in something famous. I had it written down, but I lost the note. Um, do you guys know who that was?
Which
The actor who played Meg Mucklebones, like under the prosthetics.
oh
Robert Picardo.
Yeah, because he mentioned he was in something else that I was like, wow, really? And then I lost my worksheet. Just why we
Robert
have
Picardo. He has actually played in Star Trek as a medical doctor, specifically more on Star Trek Voyager. But he later he's I think recently I just saw him in what was that Seth Rogen's version of Galaxy Quest. Not Seth Rogen. But anyways, Orville. He just starred on Orville in an episode.
well,
So,
dang. Well,
Seth MacFarlane.
yeah.
sorry we couldn't quite remember everybody. But anyway, so they make it into Darkness's lair, and they kind of get captured like right away. Did anybody else think that was sort of funny?
Oh, when who got captured?
Well, they make it into Darkness's lair like via the dungeons, and they kind of get caught right away, don't they?
Yeah, I believe so.
Like I thought that was kind of funny. Like they're thrown in a cage pretty fast.
Well, you can't get too far into darkness before getting caught, can you?
Well, I don't know. Like I thought that was pretty cool. Like there was a lot going on there. Like it's like a dungeon / butcher shop with like these like orcs and like executioner outfits, like just, like baking people into pies and stuff. It's kind of hard to describe, but like looking at that set, it's like, damn, there are a lot of skeletons here.
Actually, the coolest sets in the entire movie, in my opinion, were the ones that were underneath the tree in the evil one's lair. The torture room / butchery / jail. And then, of course, the evil lord's lair with a lot of the giant set pieces and such. Those are just amazing to behold. That whole area.
That was like some of the coolest stuff in the movie. So Lily has made it kind of into Darkness's like inner sanctum. Like Darkness has noticed kind of that mischievous like streak in Lily, and it kind of attracts him, combined with like her innocence and purity. And so he tries to make her like the queen of darkness. You know, like she's in his lair and she sees like all these like luxuriant things kind of like tempting her. Like she sees, you know, like this.
And then there's this dancer that dances around her with no face that ends up becoming her, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's one of the coolest sequences because like at this point in the movie, like she was wearing like a very white, like almost kind of like bridal gown when she first visits Jack in the forest. And over the course of her like stumbling through all these places and like getting captured and chased, like eventually she it doesn't seem like she was actually like locked up or anything when they took her. Like she was just kind of left to wander the lair. And like her outfit is like really like torn up and shredded. And in this scene, like she's looking around at like all like the jewelry and stuff, like she's picking up, and you can see like in her eyes, she's kind of like having to snap out of, it's almost like a trance kind of thing. And like she notices like this really beautiful dress just kind of standing up on its own. And after a point, like it starts dancing by itself, like the dress is dancing by itself. And you can tell it like freaks her out at first, but after a while she starts dancing with it. And like she gets closer and closer to it, like as she dances with the dress. And then there's like a quick cut, and all of a sudden she's wearing the dress. She's been cleaned up. Her hair is different. Like she has dark lipstick, and it's like a really kind of jarring transformation. But I think it's one of the cooler effects in the movie. Like, do you guys have anything to say about that?
I just thought it's a cool look.
I think it was. I think it was a definitely interesting transformation. I think it kind of like represented like her black soul. It was like the dance of death.
Maybe not death per se, but sort of succumbing to temptation of, it's like, oh, look at all this stuff that I can give you. And then well, after that we have what I'm gonna call so those of you who remember my friend Andrew that we have on sometimes, like I saw this again with him pretty shortly after I first saw it, and I'm just gonna call this Andrew's favorite scene because when I asked, it was pretty much the only one he remembered. So after she's like noticed, oh, I'm in the dress now. She's looking at herself in this giant mirror, and like Tim Curry's darkness, like this is the first time we see darkness on camera instead of just like a disembodied voice or like a figure like shrouded in a cloak. And Tim Curry's like devil like steps out of the mirror, and I remember like Andrew's reaction was, holy shit, I would have pooped myself. And I was like, yeah, that seems a little much. And it's like, and his point was just, the devil steps out of a mirror in front of you. And it's like, okay, I get it. Fair.
Well, and those were some massive horns on his head. My God, that had to be like a great, the person who made those horns had to have made it with meticulousness.
Yeah. Like Tim Curry's, from what I understand, they had to give him, because Darkness had cloven hooves too, like they had to give him like these stilts to stand on, like as part of the outfit. And so with the stilts and the horns, he was something like 13 feet tall in that thing. So damn. Like that must have been just like the craziest makeup ever. Like,
Anyone
did you guys have any comments on that?
Yeah, stand heavy. It was like hard for him to hold his head up because it was so heavy. I was like, and I had some heavy duty dedication to the role for that sort of makeup.
If I recall correctly, Darkness's look has gone on to be one of the more iconic in all of fantasy cinema, just because of how huge his horns are and his eyebrows and things like that.
Well,
yeah, they even, did anybody else notice they gave him kind of some little mannerisms too? Like during scenes where he's like more animated, he tends to like lower his head more and kind of do like charging motions like with his horns.
Kind of sort like, of. I know when he laughed, that belly laugh. Kind of. I kind of heard Pennywise in it. So.
Yeah, I can see that. Like, it's hard not to be just like totally blown away by the character and like spend all your time talking about the character, because he had a lot of the best dialogue. Like every time he talked, he had like some kind of profound sounding monologue. It was almost always some kind of profound sounding monologue. Like his character kind of runs away with the movie and like the scenes that he's in.
Tim Curry has always been a theatrical actor. Whenever he speaks, he's very articulate, and his diction is always,
spectacular.
Spectacular. Exactly. I mean, go ahead.
He was great in that role.
I mean, I suppose it's kind of a difficult thing because it's Tim Curry. He's great in everything. Like, heck, he was even great on Monk, and he didn't even really have to do anything.
Well, and he is theatrical in the sense that his origins were on the stage, and specifically, one of his big defining role on the stage was as Dr. Frankenfurter in the Rocky Horror Show, which then became the Rocky Horror Picture Show with film. And so, his strength and origins are coming from the stage, which requires you to play things more broadly. And he also plays characters who have a kind of broad style. So I mean, that's where he's most comfortable and where his origins are.
And actually, I'd read that was the role of Rocky Horror was very much part of his getting this job. Was the Ridley Scott saw that and said, "Oh, he would be a good choice."
I think Rocky Horror really opened like every door for him, didn't it?
Yeah, it pretty much did. I mean, it was a very diverse role. So seeing him play that kind of a role made him, made him a star.
Although it's really interesting, you're talking about like the big theatrical roles, and also roles where he gets to sound really, really, really creepy and evil. And you got Frankenfurter, you got Pennywise, and you got Darkness. And one of the things that I'd read about, an anecdote I read about him that I thought was hilarious, especially in light of that, is you don't get much broader, more creepy, more evil, more theatrical than the Joker. And he, of course, was originally the Joker on the animated series, and they fired him because he was too scary. And of course, Mark Hamill, made history with with that voice performance. But I would have loved to have known what Curry would have sounded like that made him sound too scary for the show.
I wonder if there's like demos of that exist somewhere. That'd be cool to hear.
I'd assume there would have to be. I have the animated series like Blu-ray set, and I don't think there's any mention of that on there. Or if there was, it's brief enough that I don't remember it. So if they had the tape, I think they would have put it on that set, right?
Maybe, I don't know, but I mean, he did a lot of voice work on animated shows in the 90s. And why not? He's so good at it.
And again, that Batman Blu-ray set is kind of one of the laziest releases like I've ever owned. Like I think it has only like minimal features, and they're all ported over from the DVD set. I think there might be like one new thing on the Blu-ray set.
They released the episode order.
I think so. I'm not exactly. I think they fixed the episode order on those. But I don't know. I kind of
check my DVD volumes of the set too, just to see if they.
But yeah, I would really like to hear what Curry sounded like as the Joker. But Tim Curry, digression aside, whew, that was a long one, guys.
I guess are we on character? Is that the?
I know we're kind of working everything in at once. So, I mean, like the next scene, I think is kind of one of my favorite sequences of scenes, where Darkness like tries to seduce Lily into becoming the Queen of Darkness. Like, but didn't you help me do this? You lured out the Unicron. And he basically just like lays bare like all the things that she did that were wrong, and she's just kind of like, no. Like,
well, and she ultimately right away regrets what she did, even though she was like running frantic in that attic in the very beginning. But she, and then again when she was with the not Screwball, but the other dwarf, which I believe that's what they are. They're dwarfs.
Brown Tom.
Brown Tom. The one that had the arrow in his brain.
For some reason, I thought they were gnomes, but it's kind of unclear. So
because they mentioned elves, and to me, you can't mention elves without dwarves.
yeah, I see that.
But in any case, when she was with him, she was like, "I just want to make things right," and he's like, well,
you can't accept me.
So,
but yeah, those were some pretty great scenes overall, just of like I wish I could remember like word for word his monologues because they're so good. Like,
There were
I
definitely
mean,
some
I stopped
decent-
taking. They were so good. Like, I stopped taking notes and was just like enthralled.
Well, it is theatrical. All of his monologues are. So you could see him just standing on stage delivering all those.
It's like, you
have
disgust me.
what?
You're an animal. It's like, we are all animals, my lady. Some are too afraid to admit it. It's like, yeah, damn. Okay.
Princess Lily saying you are nothing but an animal. We are all animals, my lady.
But I don't know,
You have a couple moments where even with all that makeup, that creepy Tim Curry grin does come through a couple of times.
it's like, oh yeah, that really sells it too. I think one of my favorite moments from the documentary. So I have the Ultimate Edition Blu-ray, which comes with the theatrical and director's cut, and like an almost hour-long documentary, like the making of Legend. And there were some things during the section where they're talking about the original script. They got a note back from like one of the producers. It's like, quote, "You can't have the villain fuck the princess," unquote. And it's like, oh, that happened in the original draft. Okay.
Huh.
The character that I like, I guess, the most in here is probably Screwball. Basically because he's one of the ones that gets the two Brownton and himself in trouble during the whole thing, and they're running their asses off in there.
They have like they all split up to like look for Lily and the unicorn like in the lair, and those are the two that have like little like misadventures, right? Like they're kind of like sneaking around. It's like, what are we doing here, man? It's like, I don't know. It's like, I vote we run like hell. Seconded. And they turn around and Jack's there and it's like, what'd you find? It's like, oh yeah, we weren't running anywhere.
And then you had where the one guy was tasked to set up the mirror for the sun and he fell asleep.
Yeah, they figure out how to beat darkness. Like they're going to use a bunch of mirrors to reflect sunlight down into darkness's lair and blast him with it. And so there's a pretty prolonged sequence where they're collecting like shiny objects for that. Because while darkness is like trying to win Lily over, like he shares that, sunshine is my destroyer, and they're like watching through the door, and they hear that, and they're like, I think I know how we can beat him. Like, yeah. And then after that, they decide to steal like plates from the torture kitchen, and they ended up like waking up the guards by making noise. And so there's a fairly cool fight scene that happens there. Like, you remember that, guys?
Yeah, I remember that.
Yep.
Talk more about it. My voice is starting to hurt.
Well, that also gave Jack one of those little moments. I think it was when he finally got the guy by putting a boiling pot of something over him. And I feel like he had that sort of reaction of, oh, I did it.
He's still like, yeah. They were like orcs or something. Like they had like, it's never quite clear like what the executioner butchers are. Like you can tell they have like giant teeth jutting out from under their masks, and they look kind of physically human, but they're so damn tall, like orcs or ogres or something. But I mean, that was kind of one of the charms of this movie, is that it had like so much diversity within it that they didn't bother to name anything. Kind of like a Star Wars movie, it doesn't name all the aliens in the cantina,
Well, some of the characters had names, like the three hooligans that were the goblins. They had somewhat names. Blix was the main character, and then I think Pox and Blunder were two of the other names. Una was the fairy that was had infatuations with Jack.
Oh yeah, we didn't really. Well, I guess we'll get to Una in characters when we wrap that part
The
up.
reason why I mentioned Billy Blart earlier is because he's been a phenomenal character actor in later '80s films, and this was like the first appearance that I remember of him. Even though I know he was in some Sid and Mary Krofft stuff like earlier on in television, but later on he was Gwildor in The Masters of the Universe. He played one of the Seven Dwarves, and he also played Rumpelstiltskin in some of the canon fairy tales that some of us probably remember.
And the Masters of the Universe is one that, oh man, that's very nostalgic.
Well, he also played in Willow as High Eldor. So
I still haven't seen Willow. I wish I had like this rich base of knowledge that wasn't horror. I only know horror.
Well, as we stated in the beginning, and I know Jacob, I think, was the one that brought it up. This was a rich time for this type of film. I mean, this really was. There were many films of this type around in the 80s and up to the early 90s. I do feel like that it went from a few post-apocalyptics and a ton of like sword and sorcery fantasies to a few sword and sorcery fantasies to mostly post-apocalyptics as the time went on. But it was still, to me, there were a lot of films like that. I mean, Lady Hawk, I think, is another one that came out at that time period. Dragon Slayer.
Dragon Slayer's
ones
good.
like that.
All I remember,
even the Barbarians.
All I remember about Dragon Slayer is I think I saw it once on the Disney Channel, and from what I remembered, this might have been a different movie. From what I remembered, it's like they chain a princess up to the wall, like to sacrifice it to the dragon, and like the dragon gets her, and like the next time they show the wall, it's just like her torn off arms are like still in the manacles, and that freaked the absolute shit out of me. Like I hated that, and never wanted to see it again.
And then, of course, there were the Roger Corman productions that came out, like Deathstalker, Barbarian Queen, you know, the Sorcerer, some of those.
Deathstalker 1 and 2.
There was a whole wave of like fantasy.
Believe it or not,
we're ahead of ourselves here. But yeah, I guess there was a whole huge wave of fantasy in that time period, and like it seems like only some of them were successful at the time. Like I know this fell strangely flat, like on arrival, from what I understand. Along with Black Cauldron and basically everything else. Like it's all found its audience over time, but for whatever reason, the stuff just didn't seem all that successful when it came out. Was that really the case?
I think this film kind of holds some nostalgia for me. Kind of like the Neverending Story does.
I love it like totally without the effects of nostalgia. I mean, I'd never even heard of it until like I saw it in what was it, 2008 or something like that. I think what may have helped was so I saw this in undergrad, and in that time period, I knew somebody who looked almost exactly like Princess Lily, and so I think that may have been like part of it. So even now, it was kind of hard to like. It's like, okay, that's a character in the movie. That's not the girl's name, and it's like, like they look so much alike, and it sort of freaks me out. But oh wow, we were talking about the plot, weren't we? God damn. This is what happens when you drink.
Yeah.
Oh my god, an awful lot of moonshine during the broadcast. Yeah, I have like a mason jar of the stuff, and I have maybe a third of what I started with, and it was about half full when I. Ooh. Anyway, so Darkness tries to convince Lily to like embrace the darkness, and that mostly fails. Meanwhile, you know, Jack and the gang have like dispatched the kitchen ogres and have set up like this elaborate thing that's going to reflect the sunlight into Darkness's lair.
I just see a scene where they're throwing these discs like frisbees.
Yeah, they're taking like pans from the kitchen, and that's what they're going to use to reflect the light. And like they're doing a pretty good job of staying quiet until one of the dwarves trips into like the big pile of them, and like the noise wakes up the ogres, and that's when that battle breaks out. And so it kind of cuts back to, Darkness is getting kind of tired of like Lily like messing with him. And he like, I think one of my favorite like things that he does is like he wants her to sit down in this like clearly like enchanted chair. Like you get the feeling that if she sits down in it, it's going to like corrupt her soul. And so that's kind of like his whole goal during like all those scenes. It's just like, sit and talk with me. And like as soon as she starts getting close to sitting in the chair, like you can see it's like growing claws and stuff. Like, did you guys catch that?
Yeah, that's something that was only in the director's cut, because in the theatrical cut, of course, theatrical cut was really easy to get lost. If you didn't pay attention to everything, you would get lost in a moment.
Yeah,
because it moved in lightning speed. So the theatrical cut was much easier to follow plot-wise.
Actually, that sort of reminds me of kind of like what watching Prometheus was like. A lot of people I know like hated Prometheus because a lot of it was confusing, but I was fine with it when I watched it because I watched it like with my face like glued to the screen, not doing anything else, paying like absolute attention, and like I thought the movie was fine because of that. But when I went back and like revisited it, it's like, okay, if I wasn't paying attention here, I would have been totally lost for like 40% of the movie. And it's just like a minute of like dialogue. So you kind of get, I sort of want to say Ridley Scott-isms. You kind of get a little bit of that here. And so I can totally see like how you would have had that experience. And I kind of do too, because this is a movie where they don't quite spell everything out, like even things that they maybe should have. I mean, it's good for a movie to, give the audience like some respect to be able to figure things out. But that only extends so far, I think. Like, right, Dane?
Yeah, definitely. But again, good movie overall. I'm holding off a lot until we get to the music. But we'll get to the end.
Yeah, sorry, I had to unmute my mic. As far as giving your audience credit, generally speaking, as a writer and a storyteller, it is very good to. I actually, good that you brought that up because I was told as a screenwriting student, and I think this applies for directors too, is to trust your audience, and in other words, that you shouldn't have to like talk down to them or hold their hand too much. I mean, at the same time, you shouldn't be deliberately esoteric or alienating unless you're someone like Tom Green and that's kind of your goal, or Andy Kaufman or something. But in other words, as much as you can trust that your audience will understand what you're doing, presumably because they're interested in your movie and they either paid to see it or they're choosing to watch it or whatever, then the better. And Ridley Scott, I think, is a good one to do that. A lot of the great filmmakers and screenwriters are good at that. But yeah, trusting your audience is very important in anything you make. One specifically in my case, I remember I was writing a romantic comedy which was a genre I had never done before, and I wasn't sure if people would understand where I was coming from or if they would think it was funny or relatable or whatever. And I hadn't written comedy before, and that was partially what my anxiety was. But my professor said to just go with what I thought was funny and just to believe in that. And the audience, or in this case, the readers, the fellow students, would be able to go along with that. And the more I believed in it, the more that I put myself into it, the more that they would understand. And that really stuck with me. And I think that is very true regardless of if it's comedy or if it's anything. It's just the more you believe in it and the more you trust your audience, then the better off you are as a storyteller. And I think the audiences appreciate that.
Yeah,
I think-
but that sort of makes me think of sort of the other opposite of that. Like on the commentary for Cannibal the Musical, they pointed out that they have like 2 or 3 minutes dedicated to like their characters like buying fudge at the general store in order to set up the joke later. It's like, do you want some fudge, Packer? Because the guy's name is Packer.
Oh,
And,
well,
like-
I'm a big fan of those kind of like layered jokes and references and things like that, just because they are able to encourage people to, look at it further. Now, that only works if something.
Well, you
It only works if it is something that people could understand without knowing it. Like if it works in the context of the story.
well they
And-
in the commentary they pointed out that it was sort of a mistake because they were like, yeah, we spent all this time remember that they were drinking when they did the commentary, and that kind of made it more earnest. And so there was a moment where it's like, yeah, that was sort of unnecessary. It's like, remember we thought we had to spend all this time like setting up that joke because we hadn't had the screenwriting class yet. Oh yeah, like we didn't need to do that.
Well,
So-
Trey and Matt are also very forthcoming with their mistakes if they feel like they've made any, so they're not trying to fool us into thinking that they're perfect.
And just seemed like an example of the opposite effect, but
Well, I mean,
Ooh.
yeah, I mean, you'll inevitably get like people who think that such and such is too esoteric or they didn't get it or whatever. And generally speaking, I am on the opposite side of the argument where I'm like, well, if you're watching this movie, then hopefully you are at least somewhat intelligent or invested enough to where you can get what we're putting out there. I do think that if you're a good storyteller, you're gonna trust your audience, but you also are not going to deliberately try to alienate them unless your specific goal is to be alienating. But that's a whole other story.
well, yeah. Ooh, boy, we've been meandering a bit here, huh? Sorry, guys. But I think we're getting some good points in. What was that, Jake?
I was just wondering if we should go ahead and move on to the other like.
Oh, I'm finishing the story.
Oh.
We're almost done.
Yeah.
So anyway, so at this point, Darkness like loses patience with Lily after she starts to sit in the chair. Like the chair starts doing something. And he's like, yes. You can see on his face, like, yeah, I've almost got her. And then she's like, no, I think I'll stand. And he's like, ah, and he like smashes a bunch of stuff off the table. And I think I liked that part of like his physicality too, because I mean, he's presented himself as like such a regal character up until that point where we've like seen him physically. And he just kind of like, kind of lets it drop for a moment, and we see him just like smash something and be intimidating, and it's like, ugh. It's like, and you get sort of a sense of the danger that Lily was actually in this entire time.
Another thing is that scene or the scene with Lily in that part. And correct me if I'm wrong, because again, I might have missed some stuff. But I believe that scene when she first meets him face to face is the first time in the director's cut that you actually see him face to face, right?
Exactly, yeah. And like she actually faints after he steps out of that mirror.
Like in the theatrical cut, they open with him. You see him from the beginning of the movie, and I kind of like the idea of keeping it back for a while. It kind of that was, I think, a more effective way to do it.
Yeah, it adds a lot. It adds a lot to not seeing him until that reveal. Because I mean, like I told the story earlier with Andrew, where he had like such a strong reaction off of that. We saw the director's cut, so it was the first time that character had been on camera, and it made him so much more impressive. I mean, I have a couple little moments like during that I really like just as like single shots. Apparently my brain played a couple of tricks on me when I revisited it this time. So after he steps out of the mirror and Lily sees him, like her eyes go wide and she faints. And there's a moment where he kind of like leans over her and his like cape billows out. And in my mind, I could have sworn that like his cape had like a starscape in it. Like it's just like a silvery cape like in this version, but I think sometimes your mind fills in like the blanks on some things, and so my memory of that scene was just like a shot where his cape like looked like a snapshot of the universe, and I kind of wish that had been the actual like shot. But there's a lot that presentation can do in a scene that makes you see something that's not quite there, that really amplifies the moment.
And there may be some things that you might remember when you first watched it, and you're like, "Wait a minute, I thought that this played this and it went this way," and you're like, "Huh, oh, that's not what happened this time around, is it?"
Yeah. But anyway, so at that moment, Lily decides to play along, and she's like, fine, I'll do what you want. I'll live with you here with you and become your queen. And he's like, oh yeah? It's like, just give me one favor. Whatever, anything. He doesn't say it like that eagerly, but you kind of get that like feeling. And she's like, I want to kill the unicorn myself. And he's like, yes. Which leads sort of to our climax where, so the unicorn is like chained in the dungeon, like surrounded by like cultists in robes. And, Darkness like says some like invocation bluster and stuff. And Lily kind of joins in too. And so there's a moment where like she's like lifting like the sword or whatever it is like to kill the unicorn. Jack and like his party are kind of watching from the rafters, like with their bows, like they've got their bows drawn. And there's a moment where it's like, if Lily kills the unicorn, like that's it, we've got to shoot her. And like Jack, it's basically Jack's decision, do I trust Lily or do I shoot her? Like, is she actually gone? And like Jack just like lowers his bow, like, I trust you. And she cuts the chain and like frees the unicorn. And Darkness like punches her out. And then like the final battle starts. But I really liked that moment as well, because it just like showed like the strength of their relationship. And it would have been a real downer if he actually shot her, Like, what'd you guys think of that scene? Anybody?
Actually, to me,
I'm by myself. Got it.
Actually, oh, go ahead, Jacob. Go ahead.
No, that was my thought.
Well, any case, for me, I thought that the guy, the person who played the Gump, I mean, he was what, a young teenager. He did an excellent job acting that character out. Be it the slightly childish nature that he presents in the director's cut, or the more whimsical natured character that he presents in the director's cut. I mean, not director's cut, in the theatrical cut.
Yeah, he's kind of a puck who takes himself seriously, right?
But he's a very paranoid individual as you go around and you get to know his character throughout the movie. And he's the one who's driving it home. And I find it interesting that he tells the main character, trust in your heart, and then shoot her, you can't trust her, shoot her. I'll shoot her. It's just, to me, I always thought that was weird. And when I heard it, and that was the same. And that was presented the same in both cuts. So it was just kind of weird both ways around. There was no change in that.
I'm so caught up in like the relationship with Lily that he has aspect of that moment that I kind of didn't notice that. So thanks for pointing that out.
Well,
but he was kind of put out as paranoid, so and judgmental, which is why the fairy wanted to keep the secret from him.
I think the Gump is my second favorite character in the whole film because you get the introduction to him by that riddle, and he thinks he's going to stump Jack with the riddle, and when he figures it out, he goes into like a a temper tantrum, on the ground, and it's funny, but, he's acting like a child, and yet he's supposed to be the supreme leader of the fairies.
It's actually funny because the way that they do that scene in the theatrical cut is he's just like, so why did you do that? I'm upset. It's like, I did it for love. Oh, well, if
Okay.
that's the case, everything's good. Let's drink to it. All's good.
Right. It's like I don't know. That makes me think of like the scene in Hook where you guys know Hook, right? Like adult Peter Pan like fights Captain Hook, and he beats Captain Hook, but he knocks Captain Hook's wig off, and it's like, may I die with my dignity? And Peter Pan is like, oh, okay, I get it. Here's your wig. It makes me think of that.
Yeah.
What are you saying, Jake?
I was just saying, yeah. Although I will say, I was reminded with him throwing the tantrum there. That kind of, to me, that echoed the story of Rumpelstiltskin. Am I remembering that story correctly? But that's kind of what ran through my brain, like the tantrum because he got it right or whatever. But it definitely goes much quicker here. It's again, it's like a beat later. Let's drink.
Yeah, you don't have any thoughts on that scene, Dane? Like usually you're pretty good for deep commentary.
For the being it, yeah, it's definitely something that whenever the hero can allow the villain to have some kind of dignity at the end. I mean, that you don't really see that a whole lot in stories, and that is something that is a bit refreshing in this story and in Hook, like you said.
Well, yeah.
It's something.
Meant,
yeah, say it again.
Oh, I meant how he, kind of like puts everything on like his trust in Lily.
Oh, definitely. I mean, that does speak to the strength of their relationship, and it's definitely a gamble on his part. But that also speaks to the fact that he realizes that he alone cannot save the day. In fact, you might even say that that's a nice twist on the classical fantasy hero in the sense that he single-handedly doesn't save the day. He does get a lot of help from other supporting characters and from the princess herself, who, is pretty able, to aid in the situation. So that's nice that it's a team effort.
Yeah.
And it's especially interesting because Tom Cruise did follow this up with a movie where he literally went by a name of "I'm going to go it alone because I am a maverick."
Yeah, it's been so long since I've seen Top Gun. Like, I forgot that was him. Like,
Yeah,
I know
that
Tom
was
Cruise.
his whole.
I know Tom Cruise from literally this and Tropic Thunder. I don't remember any of the other shit he's done.
Wow.
He's
Well, I'm a
These oddball movies.
I'm a big Tom Cruise fan as an actor. And because I've always been impressed with his work. Just because he brings a lot of intensity to all of his roles, which I respect. But like, I think that that is kind of a funny comparison, that he is more akin to being a team player in here, but then as Maverick, he has to learn to trust other people much more, in a much tougher way, because he loses his best friend and everything. It just but again, that shows that he can play a lot of different sides to a person. But that is kind of a funny comparison.
As we digress again. But so
Yeah.
anyway, then we get like our climactic final battle here, where Jack jumps down and attempts to sword fight Darkness, which how do we describe this fight? It's kind of funny. So again, I saw this with Andrew like a while ago, and Andrew does like he's probably gonna get mad at me if I just say LARP, but LARP, like he's involved with like fencing clubs and all kinds of stuff, so he knows like how to actually sword fight, like with real technique and like not die. And I was like, so what do you think of this fight? And it's like, oh, well, his form is terrible. And then like Darkness starts just like shooting fire wherever he points the sword. And Andrew was like, oh, never mind. It doesn't matter. I thought that was funny. But Jack does an okay job of like holding off Darkness like in that fight. Like it's not like a typical like movie sword fight where like the hero and the villain are like evenly matched. It's like Jack doesn't know what he's doing. Like it's he's kind of lucky the sunlight plan works out, let's just say.
Well, and isn't that also a nice thing that your hero is far from invincible or even all that previously experienced, because his realm of understanding is the forest and is, you know, the creatures in the forest. It's not going on a big adventure like that, you know. So in its own way, that does have a little bit in common with Bilbo Baggins, you know, who also is described by J.R.R. Tolkien as someone who never goes on adventures. You know, he's a homebody. Now, granted, he's much more curmudgeonly than Jack is, but you know, same kind of thing applies.
Jack is pretty acrobatic too. Like I think that helps him out a lot. Like Jack is very, oh my god, I almost said Jack is very nimble.
Yeah, yes, but then again, with the Hobbit comparison, you know, Bilbo Baggins is not terribly athletic, but he proves himself to be much braver and more crafty than people thought. So here you have the Jack who is nimble and quick, who is able to fend off this huge, intimidating villain. So, I mean, that just, again, speaks to the strength of that character and the fact that he can be outside of his comfort zone.
Yeah, and I particularly like Darkness's line here, like, always a pleasure to take a brave man's life, swings giant sword, shoots fire. You know, it's like, oh, damn.
Speak back to your 13 feet saying that that's what he stood at with those stilts, Darkness. In a way, it's like Jack slew a giant.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I think the way I'm not sure how they counted that up. Like, I'm betting at least 3 of those were like the horns, because they kind of curve upward a little bit. Like when the fight breaks out, like he does this like cool thing where he kind of charges at Jack like a bull and like pins him against the wall. It's like, what do we have here? It's like, oh shit! And Jack like punches him, and it actually kind of staggers him a bit. It's like, what the fuck was that?
Now, I do want to ask, maybe I missed something, but the light plan does work, but there were those 2 doors that were shut, and it seemed almost like they opened because of the force of the light. And I'm sitting there going, I don't know about that.
So their plan to reflect light from above, like through like that network of like mirror surface of like shiny surfaces into Darkness's lair, like that does work, despite some issues with the person who's supposed to hold up the first mirror, which I'll let Dave get to in a moment. But as soon as the light enters Darkness's lair, it seems to just plow through like all the obstacles. Like the light blows a hole in the door of the room that Darkness is in. And like when it hits him, like you can tell it kind of hurts. Like it pushes him. So this room in like Darkness's like dungeon has what looks like an opening directly into space, like into the universe. Like it's really cool and kind of doesn't quite make sense, but it's one of those things that. What?
I figured that was the void, maybe?
That's what I thought too. It's one of those things that doesn't quite make sense, but still makes sense in some way. It's like you don't have an explanation for it, but it seems to fit. You know what I mean? Like that's the vibe I got from that. And so, anyway, like the light hits Darkness, and he's like, "Oh!" And Jack sees the unicorn horn and stabs him with it. Darkness is like, "Father, protect me," and then gets like blasted to like the edges of and he grabs onto like the edges of the hole into the void, and like he gives us like one last monologue, like, "What is light without darkness? I am a part of all of you." And Jack's like, "Fuck you," and like hits him with the sword. And Darkness like goes flying off into space, which Ridley Scott just loves shooting monsters into space. Did anybody else think that, like, watching this? It's like, yeah, sure.
Well, let's also not forget that the Lou Ferrigno Hercules films, the first one, he like throws a lion, or no, he throws a bear into space. So, I mean, maybe, and not to mention Masters of the Universe and all that stuff. So maybe that was just a thing to kind of blend space with high fantasy.
Shoot the villain into space. We do an aliens.
Yeah, that was a different 80s film. Adventures of Hercules.
All the things being shot into space. Anybody else have any comments on that moment?
Oh, it kind of goes back to darkness becomes nothingness, because when the when the world was without form, before.
That's the first speech Darkness gives in the movie. It's like, in the beginning there was the void, and it was perfect darkness, and then the light broke it up, and it's like, okay, I see where he's coming from here. And then he like re-enters the void. Like, did anybody notice that when he gets far enough away that he's just kind of like a speck, like he becomes like a shooting star against that?
Well, that's a pretty common effect. I mean, look at every episode of Pokemon where Team Rocket is, and they, Team Rocket's blasting off again.
And then you see like, but this one moves. Like, it's not just like a glint off in the distance. It's like it stops and then it goes in a direction.
Yeah, that could be just artistic license if I had to guess.
I actually thought I saw it break up into 4 spots, but which is kind of like the whole, you strike me down, I come back that much greater.
Well, for me, it was like, where the hell did he go? So, I wonder if this had been more successful. I wonder if we would have gotten some kind of like Legend 2 or something, Like,
certainly Ridley Scott's working on a Gladiator 2, so maybe Legend 2 will be his next one.
Yeah. Wait, he did Gladiator?
Yeah, he did. I thought that his Robin Hood was sort of like an unofficial Gladiator too.
Was when did he do Robin Hood?
That was recent, wasn't it?
That was 2010.
He also used Russell Crowe as Robin Hood. So
yeah, which is one of the reasons why people were thinking that this year's was like another one so soon.
Wow.
I saw the trailer for that new Robin Hood, and I was like, "This is gonna be absolute.
This is gonna be bullshit. This is gonna be bullshit."
Yeah. Well, and it got a bunch of Razzie nominations, so I wasn't wrong. But
get wrecked.
Yeah,
Fox or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I just remember seeing the trailer, and I was like, "What time period is this in?"
It's like, why do we need to have this happen again?
Yeah. Too soon.
Well, anyway, so after Darkness gets sent off into space, like Jack runs over to Lily, and she is like, she looks dead, but she's just like knocked out, and it's like, she's bewitched. You have to break the curse. And then it kind of cuts back to like him diving in to retrieve the ring, and like he gets the ring, like kisses her, and like she wakes up, and then she's like, was it all a dream? And it's like, you're okay now. And it's like, oh, so no, it wasn't a dream at all. And then like they finally like kiss, and it's sort of like the culmination of that relationship. It's like,
well, she sings again to him in the end.
Yeah, like I can be like weirdly sappy sometimes. I mean, like, I don't know. I really liked the ending of this movie. It's like, oh, yeah, everything's okay.
I do. The director's ending was better than the theatrical ending, no doubt.
I I personally like the theatrical ending where they like run off into the sunset together instead of just, it's like, I love you too. I'll come see you again tomorrow. Okay. That was the director's cut. Whereas in the theatrical cut, like I remember this part, like they run off into the sunset together, like all like the forest creatures are like, we'll miss you, Jack. And I enjoyed that more, but I mean, again, I'm like, it's really hard to like tell like how something will affect me. Like I was cracking jokes with the guy who plays Art the Clown about like sawing people in half like over the weekend. It's like, yeah, fucking kill him. And then like I'm seeing something like this, and I'm like, oh, like yeah, be happy, go live. Can you tell we finished off that jar of moonshine, by the way?
Well, I mean, I looked at the theatric. I really wish I could have seen the original European director's cut, because from what I've heard, though it's similar to the director's cut, the European theatrical cut had far more of a focus on the unicorn, other than the love story, whereas the American theatrical cut cut it so that it focused more on the love story, which I would just be curious as to how that turned out.
Is that how it was framed? Yeah, that would be interesting to evaluate. Because I mean, I heard one criticism of this where it seemed like where they viewed the unicorns as almost like MacGuffins, and it's like, well, I don't know about that, but it does seem kind of thinly explained.
I did like how magical the unicorns looked.
Oh yeah, that's another kind of thing to point out too. After they've defeated darkness, like the other unicorn, and retrieved the horn, like the other unicorn returns to life, and everything is great.
Everything's right as right.
Yeah, I mean, I like a happy ending. Yeah,
I like the ending to an extent. When everything just flows too smoothly, sometimes I wonder at the direction. It as long as it feels right. Like I don't know.
As long as it's earned.
Some endings that you kind of go look at it and they're like, "What the fuck?" And then there's no sequel in any kind of a future.
If you want to know the true king of earned happy endings, and Dustin, take some note of this, the king of the earned happy ending is Charlie Chaplin. He is the master of that, because his characters go through absolute hell before they are rewarded with their happy ending. I guess kind of a proto Don Bluth in that sense, but he's the master of being able to mix comedy with tragedy, with romance, with all the great emotions, and then he's able to have it all culminate in such a beautiful way. And so if you're wanting to experience more of the earned happy ending, there you can't find a better source for that than Charlie Chaplin.
Well, I'll have to remember that. I saw The Great Dictator a while ago, but I think I might have seen it in like the wrong mindset because I was just kind of like, that's all right. But anyway, so trying to stick to our structure here. So now that we've gone through everything, I mean, I know we've touched on basically every other aspect of the movie like throughout, but let's just see if we can try to real quick in like 2, maybe 3 minutes, like bang out, who are our favorite characters. Like I think mine would probably have to be Darkness, just because of like how unique the portrayal of that kind of character was by Tim Curry. Like the line delivery, like everything about that character was just so memorable and so perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I would give more. I mean, I think that's accurate. I do think that is a very understandably common answer, just because he is so good. But I would also give extra special shout out to our leading heroes, just because of the fact that, well, you had both Tom Cruise and Mia Sara, who are both very young, very not yet established in their respective fields, and they're both I think very well cast for their roles, and their future stardom does not overpower who the characters are. They manage to give these archetypical characters some personality. They do justice to their archetypes, but they're not limited by them, and they seem to be people that are able to be outside of whatever kind of presupposed limitations one would have.
You buy them as real people.
That, and also they manage to have good chemistry together, and they are sympathetic.
Yeah, I'm gonna be embarrassed about this later, but at the end when like they finally kiss, I was fanning myself off because I was like, oh wow, ooh.
So are you saying that Mia Sara does it for you?
Yes.
Well,
okay.
I don't.
I said earlier.
I don't blame you though, because she was.
I said earlier she looked a lot like this girl I knew. Like at the time I first saw this, yeah, that was a lot of it.
Not that I'm trying to be insulting, but did you have a possible crush on this person that kind of looks like the princess?
Well, I think that was pretty obvious. I mean, who didn't figure that out?
Well, I mean, I can't exactly blame you, because I mean, Mia Sara, especially at that time, and then subsequently in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, I mean, she was like tip top in terms of one of the most beautiful women around. And she makes for a great princess. I mean, she Ridley Scott clearly had good taste there.
Yeah. I didn't know she was so young in this though. Like I kind of was like, and
remind me how young she was.
She was like 15, and I was like, really? And I'm like looking at her like in the film, and it's like, what? Like she certainly didn't look 15. But I don't know. I've always been really bad at telling like human ages. So there's sort of a famous incident when I used to work in an animal shelter, and I mentioned that to my boss, and she's like, "Well, how old do you think I am?" 31. It's like, "Oh my god, I'm 19." It's like, "Oh." How old do you think our boss is? 45. It's like, "She's 30." It's like, "I'm sorry, I'm just not good at this." But
I'll admit, yeah, those two were very, very cool characters. I do think Tom Cruise gets a bad rap because of the whole Scientology thing and because of playing the same character in 90% of the stuff he does. But when he does something different, he's usually pretty good at it. And this definitely was a different role for him. And then, of course, Mia Sara. I had forgotten she was in Ferris Bueller until after I saw the film the first time, and then I was reminded of that. But
I forgot too.
The thing I kept thinking of, and this ties back to what I said before, I know her mainly through Birds of Prey, where she played Harleen Quinzel in that one, and so
that's right.
That thing I kept tying her and like thinking Harley and Joker, and I'm like, oh man, that's not a good subtext for this one, but it made it more interesting in a way.
Well, you could almost say that with sort of like the sinister fascination that darkness takes with Lily in this. Like you can tell. Well, I feel there's sort of like a toxic relationship thing there too.
Well, I remember.
Well,
let's not forget that it's, evil is often attracted to innocence, partially out of fascination, but also partially out of a kind of predatory drive.
It's like something that you're not.
Yes, exactly. I mean, partially it's opposites attract, but also it's a dangerous version of that, which I will make you feel a little bit better here, Dustin. So the movie came out in '85, and Mia Sara was born in 1967, so that would have made her 18 at the time. So go
Oh,
ahead.
okay.
Yeah, don't.
I feel less bad about myself then.
There you go. But yeah, I mean, that's a pretty classic trope of the well, look no further than like in the Disney Hunchback of Notre Dame with Frollo having this lust for Esmeralda, or any kind of thing where there's
Or Ben
someone.
Shapiro and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, which
I mean,
that is a
it,
meme.
any
Frollo
kind.
and Esmeralda.
Well, any kind of thing where you have some kind of authority figure, often a masculine one, and then some kind of innocent, or in the Frollo case, exoticized woman. In other words, the other, then oftentimes you get that kind of predatory attraction. But it's I think that kind of gave it a more interesting dimension than if he had no kind of attraction to her, or if it was kind of like a Bowser and Princess Peach kind of thing where it's a little too basic. Like here there seemed to be an attraction, but it was partially attraction but partially temptation also.
Yeah. It's like he was trying to appeal to like her
Yeah,
darker half that she had.
to her, not her better angels, but her not so good angels.
Yeah. Okay, is that it for characters, guys? I would hope so, 'cause
Yeah.
I think we went a little over time.
I think so.
Still need to talk about effects and music.
Oh yeah, like effects. The effects were freaking great. Like my big thing that I knew about the effects, I mean, I kind of peppered them in throughout. There was one thing that was kind of worth sharing. So the forest itself was this enormous indoor set. Like it took up like this whole studio hangar. And there was actually a fire that destroyed a lot of it. Because since they were doing like all these like weather effects and stuff, they had like gas flowing in, and eventually like enough gas accumulated like in the top of the building that there was a fire at some point, and like a lot of the set burned down. And so when Ridley Scott heard that, he like paused, and then he like went to play tennis. And so there was like a phone call that I had heard about where it was one of the producers that's like, "Oh my God, what are we gonna do? The set burned down. Like, Ridley, what are you doing now?" It's like, "I'm playing tennis." And the guy paused and was like, "That's perfect. Good. Okay." So it's like, something so catastrophic happened. Just take your mind off it. Don't obsess over it right now. Just breathe. And I thought that was a fun production story. So plus all the other stuff that we mentioned. So anybody else got stuff on effects?
No, just
Thing-
soundtrack.
I was going to say it's worth noting that they did get an Oscar nod for makeup, which the makeup effects were pretty good for the time period.
They were spectacular. Like everything was legit. Like the only thing that at the time I thought it was like an error, but I don't think so anymore. When the dress is dancing with Lily, you could see the dancer's head like moving around like under the mask that tried to like cover her. They wore like a mask that like blended in with the dress. So I think the idea was to make it look like there was no head to this dress. And I used to think that was some kind of like goof where it's like, oh, you can see the dancer's head, but I realized that was stupid on this watch.
Well, part of the reason why I thought of Legend of Zelda, besides it being legend, besides there being, big bad guy, princess, green clad forest hero, all that stuff, partially, not only that, but the scale of the adventure is such that you have mostly humanoid creatures, you have, some scary ones, you have, a journey through a dark land and that kind of stuff. You do not have, like, say, with Lord of the Rings, where it has like these giant army battles, which is a little bit closer to something like Willow, but even that is like a tiny, tiny fraction of what the scale of Lord of the Rings is supposed to be. But on a technological level, I think that what they had for the time was perfect for what the story required, and nothing felt compromised. And just the fact that it was all really there is quite impressive. And it really shows. I particularly love the forest set that you see all of these different layers of the petals and just wind and different layers of motion and color all throughout. It makes the frame really rich, and it just it shows that with the effects that they had, that they could create a really amazing world that also is very focused and isn't all about how many armies full of people can we stuff into the frame at one time, which you kind of see a little too much of nowadays. And again, it's like perhaps they couldn't have made Lord of the Rings on a reasonable budget, back then, but certainly for something like Legend of Zelda, which is not that large of a story in comparison, they definitely could have made that with that technology.
Okay. I'm trying to think of any effects that didn't quite work, and everything was pretty good. Even the kind of when darkness steps out of that mirror, it feels kind of. I think it's like a composite shot. I'm not exactly sure how they did that, but even that looks pretty believable. So, I mean, I think we're gonna have to give an A+ to all the effects on this because they were just all spectacular. Like there wasn't a moment at all where I saw like a hole in anything. So, I
Well,
mean, even if you're not interested in fantasy, at least check this out for like the practical effects because damn.
oh yeah, well I think that the films with the best effects, or rather the effects that have aged the best, are understandably the ones that are practical. The two that come to my mind are the ones that were all done in camera, namely The Exorcist and Bram Stoker's Dracula. And Bram Stoker's Dracula, especially because they do a lot of stuff there that you would swear was done after the fact, but no, it was actually done all in camera, and it still holds up to this day.
That would have been a good one, I think, for our romance themes that we're doing this month.
Oh yeah, we can. Well, we can still talk about it at some point.
Yeah, but we're running a little long, I think, as of now. So we should probably.
Well, I didn't mean right this second. I meant just later on in.
Oh no!
In
Yeah,
the show's
just,
history.
For the listeners at home, just we're not gonna go on that much longer. I promise. What was that, Jake?
I said music.
Oh yeah, music.
Yeah,
so
music.
the music. So this movie actually had two scores. It had the Tangerine Dream score for the theatrical and Jerry Goldsmith score for the director's cut. And Brandon is apparently our expert on this, so I'm gonna totally trust you with this while I go to the bathroom.
Well, I wouldn't know about expert, but I did do the research. The Goldsmith soundtrack was the original soundtrack, and for the original European theatrical release, they did do an abridged version of his soundtrack. Though, when they tried to release it in America, they found the soundtrack didn't test well with audiences. So they sought out something that was more related to the time, such as Tangerine Dream, and which is odd because they're a German group. But so they ended up doing it for the American theatrical release only, which for many of us who grew up with the film, that is the one that many of us associate with that film.
Well, let's also not forget that Tangerine Dream did the music for another big Tom Cruise movie, Risky Business, just 2 years before.
And if you remember correctly, the silent film that we did on Le Inferno also had the Tangerine Dream music as well.
Indeed.
And to tell you the truth, this is the first time I've really enjoyed them as a soundtrack. And I do still prefer it, though I think that the original soundtrack and the songs, they fit well with the fantasy narrative. I did feel like the Tangerine Dream theme, especially the last part where the sun was rising, and they were able to take out the bad guy. That that particularly itself fit the mood, in my opinion, better for this particular type of fantasy film because it is a unique film and having a unique soundtrack really fits it, in my opinion. Though many have complained that it wasn't a very fitting soundtrack for the film, but to me, I actually did consider it the better of the two. Though,
Tangerine Dream.
yes, but again, that's just my opinion. To me, I felt like it fit the way that the film was constructed, how the feel of the film was, just in general. I felt like that one was a much more apt, whereas the other one was good, but it was the typical fantasy soundtrack. Even though the writer of it considered it one of his greatest works at the time.
Well, the 80s was a time with, well, synth scores of all kinds in all kinds of movies, but also specifically you had in 1984 you had Giorgio Moroder's Metropolis with all of the contemporary pop songs over Fritz Lang's silent masterpiece Metropolis, which I've seen that version and it's kind of weird, but
I've
because
seen
it's heavily abridged.
I've
Katie's
seen the Nosferatu cut with type O negative music on it, so
that's
it's weird.
that's an
I sympathize.
um, I'm just gonna say something. I guess earlier Katie was saying that her boyfriend Ryan, um, he said that putting a synth to the film Legend is like putting a synth sounding music to the film Willow. So it just doesn't work in his mind.
Just Willow with like Carpenter Brute action music.
Well, that or like doing Lawrence of Arabia with a kazoo band.
Lawrence of Arabia with
So far, I see no issue with these. Like I'm kind of curious, like morbidly so.
I think that, in from my mind, both of the scores were pretty good. Both of them worked with the film. I thought the Jerry Goldsmith score was much more conventional in a lot of ways, but then I've heard a lot of his scores. I thought it seemed a little more conventional, but it was really nice and it fit the more introspective director's cut. The one that was clearly more action driven or whatever you would call the theatrical cut, uh, the idea that the studio basically dictated the music seems right for that. And I like the score. And am I correct that that big power ballad pop song was only on that cut as well?
On the
Yeah.
yeah, I remember it from the director. So
Yeah, and they also played down that tune that Mia Sara keeps singing, which they played a lot in the other version.
I
And
didn't
that
have
was
time to
really
revisit the Tangerine Dream score.
That was because
I
that was
kind of wish I
written by
had.
But that's because her ballad was written by the original score writer. So they kind of like just dropped that entire score for the American theatrical.
This is a good illustration of the idea of use in music and film, isn't it?
I
Yeah.
say so.
But I also have nostalgia for the Tangerine Dream, I'll admit. So it could be, well, it might just be nostalgia in my mind holding to it.
All right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's I mean, it certainly has its defenders. I mean, beyond what we've heard today. So, I would like to revisit the Tangerine Dream soundtrack and kind of make another evaluation at a later date. Anyway, so anybody want to real quick rattle off their favorite scene, or just kind of well, yeah. Anybody want to just like snap off their favorite scene? I mean, I think mine would be again, just all of the interactions between Darkness and Lily, where he's trying to seduce her into becoming his queen. Like, because all that stuff was just great by Curry, and like the way she reacts to is like totally organic. Like she's like repulsed, and he clearly doesn't understand like how this relationship stuff works. But anybody else?
I like the scene in the swamp.
I mean, the dancing down.
I think my favorite part was the part with Brown Tom getting shot with the arrow.
That's pretty funny. They swarmed us by the hundreds. It's like, yeah, sure. Do you have something, Dave?
I actually concur with Dane. I like the swamp scene.
Brandon?
My favorite, of course, is always the one where they come with the dancing gown scene in the movie. Though, out of curiosity, there were two disappearances I didn't quite track very well. One was the disappearance of the Goblin character, because once he had been sent after the second unicorn and was tracking that down, he just disappeared. And
once Blix delivers the unicorn horn, he just fucks right off, and you never see him again. It's kind of weird.
The other is, okay, what happened to the sword? When did he lose the sword? I watched this movie 3 times in the last week, and I did not see where he lost the sword.
My guess is they took it from him when they like captured them, and they were like put in cages. Because I don't think he had it when they were in the cage in the dungeon, right? And then he just kind of like sees the sword like in Darkness's like void window room, and it's like, oh shit, there it is. So, I mean, I think they had their gear taken from them when they were captured.
Okay, maybe. Again, I was just one thing. Those were just minor things that I just lost. It's easy to get lost in this film. That was my one and only major gripe with the film.
Okay.
Oh, okay. I guess that's it. Anybody have any final thoughts?
Not that I know of.
Well, this movie didn't get the recognition that I think it deserved. Well, that a lot of people think it deserved, like when it came out. And Mia Sara in particular, like in the interviews I saw, was like heartbroken that this didn't really take off the way she thought it should have, because like the script itself was so incredible, and as good as the execution was, it seems like they still didn't quite do it justice. So that's a bit of a sad note that it didn't like take off. However, it's really become like a cult thing, and like a lot of people, the people who do remember Legend, like really love it.
Which you know that Mia Sara is actually married to Brian Henson now. I think that's kind of neat. Yeah. So she has the kind of indirect connection to the other dark fantasy legacies of Jim Henson with Dark Crystal and Labyrinth.
And the terrible movie that they did recently called The Happy Time Murders.
Yeah. I liked Happy Time Murders. Fuck off. I mean, like, the criticism I heard of The Happy Time Murders that, well, the only one that I really agreed with was it's like, it's hard to get into because it's like, look at this, it's a puppet, but with a dick. And it's like, well, that is kind of a lot of the humor, but I enjoy it anyway.
I do want to,
as dumb as it sounds.
I do want to see it. I'm not keeping my expectations high, but I do want to see it just because I am a fan of the art of puppetry in some form or fashion.
I am planning on picking that up,
yeah,
but there is also an epic independent film that I was able to put money into that I'm still waiting on to come out. It's called Frank and Zed, and from the things that I've seen of how it's being put together, it's kind of underneath Frankenstein's castle. So this should be epic.
With Happy Time Murders, just keep your expectations like about average. Like, expect an okay movie like going in, and you'll have a great time. Because that's what I did, and I was like, haha, yeah. Like a couple of jokes like dragged on too much, too long because their test audiences were like, yeah, more, and it's like, oh, you tested with idiots. But yeah, Happy Tremors is okay.
Yeah, I'm just a fan of puppets in general.
You'll see a lot of weird stuff in that one that you'll, at the very minimum, you'll appreciate the technical aspects.
I've seen Meet the Feebles, so I mean, I've kind of run the gamut as far as insane adult puppetry.
That one is a classic in more ways than one.
Oh yeah, I really like Meet the Feebles because it's very daring.
One day we'll have to do that one on this show.
We should. I heard there's a Peter Jackson collection coming out with like Dead Alive, Meet the Feebles, and whatever the third one is, Bad Taste. There's supposedly a Blu-ray collection of those three coming out.
I hope so.
And yeah, sell your Dead Alive copies while you can, while they're still stupidly valuable.
I'd love to get a cleaned up copy of Meet the Feebles. The original copy is just it's not that good of quality.
Crap. Yeah. But anyway, so yeah, I guess that's it for Legend. So hopefully we didn't bore you at any point. Like, despite all the stuff we've said, like the movie is really awesome, and I mean, you can probably have a good time with either cut. I mean, what would you guys say for recommendations? Like, what would each of you recommend cut wise?
I've only seen the director's cut, so I can't really say.
I would have to say check out both of them, because each of them are different in their own way, and you can film is often interpretive, so you definitely have to know that there are several different cuts out there, and which one best suits you and how much you can watch of them is another story. So
I tend to prefer director's cuts. So I mean, I first saw the director's cut, so I guess I would recommend that. But I mean, if you enjoy the director's cut, check out the theatrical cut. Or if you don't necessarily have a whole lot of time on your hands, I mean, the theatrical cut is a lot shorter. So I mean, you could take a crack at that too. So I mean, I would recommend seeing this movie like any way you can. Director's cut, if you can get it. If not, it's not that big of an issue. So I mean, just go check this movie out. Like, you should have a good time.
Yeah, I agree with Dave. Both definitely should be watched. The director's cut is much easier to follow, but to me, the theatrical cut has a classic style all its own. So, yeah, if you have the time, get both.
What about you, Jake?
Well, I also tend to veer in favor of director's cuts, especially when it's one like this where it was a clear case of studio interference. I tend to say, screw the studio, go with the director. But they're both watchable and entertaining films, and if only for the opportunity to watch it with a totally different score, it's worth seeing both. Yeah.
So yeah. Well, the Blu-ray Ultimate Edition with both cuts is relatively cheap. Last I saw, like, it's something you can maybe find at Walmart. So yeah, give it a shot.
Are
anyway,
the visuals any upgrade to the DVD?
What?
While you were talking about the cut, were the visuals any upgrade to the DVD? Sometimes they clean up, sometimes they don't.
I've never seen the DVD. Like, I know the DVD Ultimate Cut has a fancier package, but that's the only difference I know of.
Okay.
So, but anyway, well, we've gone on pretty long, so let's wrap it up. So, we're gonna tell you who the hell we are. So, I'll start with myself. So, I'm Dustin. I'm a horror collector here in Milwaukee. I take pictures of my collection and show them off on Instagram at DHRHunter, all one word, which is probably changing to the Crypt of Horrors pretty soon, which is, I have my own channel for like collection videos now, the Crypt of Horrors on YouTube. I'm also a regular member of Pop Culture Weekly, another channel here, run by the guys who do the Twisted Dreams Horror Film Festival. Come see Joe Bob Briggs in April. Do it. And you can find me hanging out and being weird on Twitter, also at the Crypt of Horrors. So we're trying to do a brand thing. I wanted to do Vault of Horror, but that's kind of taken, you know. And I guess so.
You should do a Closet of Horror.
Well, I mean, studio apartment of horror just doesn't sound as cool. And my apartment is basically a cement box. Yeah, that's a crypt, right?
I think the Apartment of Horror sounds kind of funny.
Apartment of horror.
Like, really,
Well,
that's funny.
Well, it's a little late in the branding phase now, but maybe we'll do that. Sure. Anyway, how about you take it away now, Dane?
Sure. Well, I'm Dane Kyle. I'm an independent filmmaker out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Just might write something called Apartment of Horror, just because that's a funny name.
How dare you infringe on my trademark?
Let's see, what all do I have going on? I'm in the process of shooting another found footage horror film on the 24th to be included in a anthology feature film. I've got 4 different anthology feature films that I'm a part of that are coming out this year. Trying to get a feature film script developed, trying to write another spec script, and trying to develop a bunch of original comic book properties, and trying to shepherd my my girlfriend's Harley Quinn fan series, Asylum Origins Harley, into being. So always a lot going on. But yes, Apartment of Horror sounds very amusing. I have no idea what it's going to be, but that sounds funny.
Brandon, Jake, one of you. Who are you?
All right. Well, I run a channel called Septum Send versus the World. We are a channel dedicated to physical media of all kinds, but mostly related to movies and TV. We have been running through during the Academy Awards season, and we are doing many themed awards vlogs, podcasts, and of course top 15 lists. We have one that's already out, and then we have one that's coming up in the following week. Also on the channel, we handle reviews, and Jake has gotten one up, and I'm sure he'll tell you about that. In the future, I have 2 coming up in the future. They are filmed, edited, and ready to go. The upcoming one for this week is going to be Dakota Ray's American Antichrist. And I actually do YouTube shout-outs at the end of each one. Matter of fact, the Crypt of Horrors is the one I'm doing the shout-out for this week. So
Thank you.
I wanted to wait until you got this thing up and running fully before I did.
I had such a big backlog of stuff. Like, I would shoot things, and then I would get behind on editing. But I've got almost everything I've shot out now.
But I try to make sure I do some shout outs to that. And we've just recently passed the milestone of 100 subscribers. So we're continuing to grow at a slow but steady pace.
Hooray.
And I encourage anybody and everybody who loves physical media to join us over on our channel.
Yeah. Hey, Jake.
All right, I'm Jake, and I frequently show up on Septum Sin versus the World. And as he said, we've got a lot of fun stuff going on. The most recent top 15, people overdue for Oscar nominations. We got one we're going to film next week. People overdue to win an Oscar. And I have the one he may have been mentioning. I'm hoping I will finish editing tomorrow. I hope. Is going to be an odd, strange experiment of looking at all the films I've seen this year, and if those were the nominees, it would be a different world. I think that would be fun. And of course, I have my own occasionally updated YouTube channel, which is Kotobuki Jake. We have had some phenomenally gorgeous weather today, and will for the next couple days. So who knows? There may be a new video coming in, and that'll do for now.
All right. Midway break. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe this video and to our channels. So take it away, Dave.
And my name is David Strege. Normally, I am the main host for Inside Movies Galore. But since we are branding our Inside Galore channel, we are allowing everyone a chance to host. So, like, share, and subscribe to us, like our buddy Dustin has said. And I also do reviews on this channel, I've been YouTube has pretty much been my home lately, so definitely check out some of my latest reviews. I just put a very negative review out on Birdemic, and I'll be
fucking Birdemic. What do you expect?
I'll probably be checking out Birdemic 2. I think I have Axel review in the works, and this old
Birdemic 2 Electric Boogaloo. I'm so drunk. I'm sorry, guys.
In any case, definitely check out some of those reviews. Those reviews will be happening. I'll be checking out some more films as I go, and hopefully be able to maybe next week or the following week do a couple of discussions with the Mermaid Forest and the Mermaid Scar films. So,
has anyone said what next week's film's going to be? Because it's going to be awesome.
I think it's Let the Right One In.
Princess Bride, actually.
Oh, Princess Bride.
Then Let the Right One In.
Very different.
Both awesome.
And then Raising Arizona after that.
Oh man, I might have to go out and buy the Criterion Princess Bride.
Oh yeah.
Stop making me spend money.
What are you talking about? It's your fault. Anyways,
we'll fight later. So like, share, and subscribe, and we'll be back next week for more mayhem. Hopefully, with a little bit less time. Again, thank you so much for listening to the whole episode. If you've gotten this far, so we appreciate your endurance and support.
Say good night, everyone.
Night.
Good night.